Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. And from our last video, we managed to complete our full stack development. So at this point here, we're ready now to deploy our project using Docker. So let's start. For us to successfully compile our project, we're going to create a service plan. So we're going to start with a very main source, which is the database. Then from our database, we're going to connect that to our backend. Then from our backend to our front end. So let's work on that. But first, since we're dealing with the database, it will be best to remove all this project here so that we can only focus on the database compilation only. So let's work on that. All right, at this point here, we have a clear project. So let's create first our Docker Compose by adding docker-compose .yaml. Okay, so for our first step, we need to define the version. So just for this demo, I'll be using version 3.8. Now for our services, okay, since we're dealing with the database, so let's begin create the services for Mongo or MongoDB. For now, I just label it as Mongo, all right? And then, so just to prepare our stuff, let's prepare the networks. And I'm going to name this as LinkNet. And also for our volumes, so take note, this is only dedicated for the database. So for our volumes, I'm going to name this as Mongo data. Oops, should be Mongo data. Right. So don't forget, whenever you created the services, see to it you are aligned with this intention. Okay. So what are the requirements for our Mongo? So we have some few things in here. So first, we need to define our image. So for this demo, I'll be using the latest Mongo. Now, if you ask me if I'm using an old version, it will be best to use on that particular version. But since we're using the latest up to this time of this recording, so this method still applies to this latest itself. So everything that you created on the latest part are covered with this one. So if not, just find the certain version for your Mongo, and then that should work as well. Okay. So next, I'm going to label our container, and I'm going to name this as MongoDB server container. Then from here, I'm going to insert an environment. Right now, for our environment, I'm going to create two variables. So the first one is I'm going to initialize our user by typing mongo initdb. So I'll be picking up the root username. Okay. Now for our username, I'm going to name this as MERN admin. Next, we're going to create the password. So I just copy this one here. So this is the password. And for our password, I'm going to name this as MERN password. Now, next to this one, we're going to initialize also the port. Now for our ports, we have two things from here. The first one is the host or the local port. So by default, this is 27017, and our local port still the same. Okay, so this is the local port and the Docker port. So for now, I just set that to default. And then next to this one, let's apply the networks. Okay, in our networks, see to it you use the network defined in the earlier stage. So we're using LinkNet. So we just bring down this one or carry this over to our services. And next, same goes. Let's apply also the volumes. Okay, for the volumes, let's carry over the Mongo data. Then we assign that to our data DB in our Docker host or Docker environment. And then if there are changes or like if the server is not available or something happened, I'm going to assign this restart condition, and the condition is unless stop, right? So basically that's the first one. But on the next part, we will require the MongoDB to create a user or this user account to be active. Now, since we're dealing with authentication, we would advise to create an account just for this demo. So this is the hardest part, as it you need to create the account first before applying that to your system. So since this is the changes we're going to make with our existing MERN, because earlier when I created the code, I didn't use any authentication. So for this demo, we're going to apply an authentication that will connect to our backend or database. So let's work on that. To start with, let us create a new folder, and we're going to name this as Mongo hyphen entry point. All right. So within this Mongo entry point, we're going to create a new file. We're going to name this as Mongo hyphen init.js. Right. So these are the files needed for our user creation. Now, for this to take effect, let us apply the DB connection. But for now, DB is already okay. So DB is already reserved word for creating our MongoDB. So just set the DB and get sibling DB. Okay, so the first thing we require is we need to have an authentication with the admin. So for that to work, we're going to use this get sibling admin. So this is the version of use admin. And then using the same DB, we're going to create a user. Okay, so with this user, we're going to assign the following. So we need the user, the password, and the roles. Okay. Now, what are the things needed for this one? So the first thing is we need to import the environment account. So earlier, we set those things in the environment. So to call that, let us type process.env. Oops. Let's type that once more. Okay. So let's type process.env. Dot. Okay. So let's copy the username. Okay. So that's for our username. So next, let's copy also this one. And this time, let's call now the password. All right. So that's all we need for the account. So next, from here, let's create our roles. So roles is very important. This is will give an access to one account. So for our roles, let's type role, and then we're going to assign the read write, and for the database, we're going to assign the that's DB. Going to assign the admin. Let's save that. So basically, this is all we need for our account creation. So we're assigning a role that's assigned to the admin. So this user and password account was taken from our environment. This section will be automatically created during the process. Okay. So let's add that features now. Now, since we already created that, we want that to import to our Docker. So for that to work, let's type hyphen dot slash the name of the folder, which is the Mongo entry point. Okay. And then we need to specify the files, which is the Mongo hyphen init.js. Okay. So make sure you enter the file name for the SAP path for your connection. And then we're going to assign that or forward that to our Docker entry point hyphen init. So this should be init db.ed slash and the name of the file name, which is the mongo hyphen init.js. Okay, at the end of this connection, let's assign a read-only operation, okay, or permission. So this will execute this command from this mongo init db. Now to test this one, okay, so make sure you save everything from here, and then let's open a terminal. Okay, so make sure before we start, check everything from top to bottom. And then once you're okay with this one, let's type Docker compose So, and then just hit start. Okay, so we have an error. Volumes must be mapping. Okay, so let's check why is it our volumes did not map very well. Okay, so this is very important. Okay, we need to specify the colon. Okay, so this is specified as the mapping part. Okay, so yeah, that should be okay now. So let's clear this up. Then let's try once more. Okay, good. So at this point here, everything from our Docker Compose is okay. So let's wait for the result. Right? So this one here, everything is okay. So let's scan everything just to make sure that we don't encounter any errors. Very important to check, especially the account creation. If you don't see any sign of errors during this process, so just to confirm, we're going to connect that to our MongoDB or any app that you have right now. Since I already introduced this on my earlier chapters, so I'll be using this Mongo extension, this one. So with this one, okay, going to remove this connection so that we have or a new account. So let's recreate those accounts by adding this connection. All right. So using this one, let's open a form, and then from here, select this user or password. There. So let's type the account. If this works, so which means our account was already created. All right. The password. Okay. By default, it will authenticate using the database admin. So since it already has the default, so we don't need to build this up. Just click connect, and there you go. Now to check our connection, all right. So this indicates that our connection to our MongoDB database is working. To check your account, head over to this admin database. Then from here, go to the system users. See here. Okay. If you notice this account here, there you go. So at this point here, our admin account is already saved or stored in our admin database. So with the privilege also that we said earlier, which is the read and write, so everything in this account is already functionable. All right. So that's all for the checking. Now that we've managed to save or store our account, this time we can proceed now on our connection to our backend. So let's work on that. But first, we need to clear everything from here. All right. So on the next screen, we're going to import now the backend. So let's move to that. Right. So we're here now. So let's open our API and make sure we minimize this one. All right. So there you go. Now notice here, not everything from these sections are we're going to out or add in our Docker. So we're going to make some exemptions. So to less our concern, we're going to create a Docker ignore. This will ignore all those things that won't be needed in our Docker. So let's create a new file and start by typing that Docker ignore. Okay. So from our Docker ignore, we're going to ignore some of the folders from here. So, so by default, most of these cases you may see from this list are the things that are not necessary. Since these are already mixed with some other factors in here, so safe to say we can remove some parts from this list. So let's say node modules should, because we already have that. So just remove only these logs, except this Docker file, post, Docker ignore, git if have. So we don't have the git here. Git ignore. Okay, so on the long run, we're going to have a git ignore. So just leave as is. I'm also going to remove these two things from here. If you have read only, also you need to exclude that. So from here to down here, it's safe to say that we can remove that, right? So leave only those that necessary for this to work or existing on your API folder, right? So that's all we need from here. Anyway, so that's the only files that needed for our Docker ignore. So whenever we're going to compile something, this will be excluded during the process. Next, let's create a Docker file. Okay, so within the API folder, create the Docker file. Okay, uh, this should be big letter D. All right, so that's what we need. So Docker file will help us compile our project. Okay, so to start with, within our Docker file, let's begin by import the from node. So just for this demo, I'm using the latest node, and then the working directory. Okay, I'll be using or storing this folder to server. Okay, so from here, let's copy or assign a copy instruction to our package .json, and let's assign that to that particular folder, probably on the root. And then let's assign an instruction for run npm install. Then let's perform the copy instruction. Also, let's expose the port 4000. And the last one, we're going to issue a cmd command. Okay, so this should be 4000. Make sure you save that. So this is all we need for our Docker file for API. So next, we're going to update down the Docker Compose. So let's proceed to that. All right. So now that we're in our Docker Compose, so this time let's create a service for that. So let's move in this corner here. Okay. So for our services, we're going to name this as server, and we're going to specify the field location. So let's say I'm going to, okay. So let's say I'm going to set the location of the path, that is the slash API, so which is our folder. And then let's create a container name, and we're going to name this as server container. Next, we're going to set the environment. Now, since we're going to connect our backend, we're going to be needing the following. So this time, we'll be needing first the DB user. Now, for DB user, we're going to copy this one, MERN admin. And then, let's set up also the password. Right? Now, next to that, we're going to set up also the host. Now, for our host, since we're using Docker, we're going to copy these services. Right? And then, we're going to set also the port. Now, for our port, we'll be using the default one, which is the 207017. And also, we're going to include the database name. So for our database name, we're going to name that as MyDB. And then let's include also our server port. Now for our server port, we're going to set this as port 4000. Now please take note, the port that we're using in our Docker file should also be the same with our server port. Okay, so this is the connection to our system. And then from here, we're going to also expose the ports. So since we have two ports to be set, so the first one is the port 4000, which is the localhost, and we're going to port from the localhost. Okay, so there are no changes with this one. Now next, we're going to set also the volumes. Now for our volumes, take note, during the creation of Docker file, we set that volume to slash server. So let's add that. Now, to start, let us forward the folder, which is the API, and then we're going to forward that or copy that to our server. Now, from our server, we need to also initialize our or set a path for our node modules. All right. So that's all we need for our volumes. Okay, next to that, we're going to set a depends on. So this will rely on the source. So since our source is the server or which is the Mongo, so let's set to that. Okay. Since this relies on Mongo, so this will be the trigger point for this one to run. And the last one, we're going to insert the networks, which is the networks that we set to our Mongo. So remember here, we set that to link net. So we can copy that. And then let's emphasize the restart. Now for our trigger point, we're going to restart only if failure. Okay, so that's all we need for our server. Now, since we're dealing now with authentication, with this environment, we're going to modify also our system. So if you recall, we set up our config like this one to a simple or basic connection only. So this time, we're going to create a connection that supports the authentication. So let's work on that. Okay, so from here, but first we need to extract the environment. So by assigning a cons, we're going to extract our process.env. Okay, so what are the things that we're going to extract? So if you check here, these are the things that we need. So I'm going to copy this one, then paste it here. Okay, so let's remove the other things from here. Okay, so from here, let's remove this one, change to comma. Okay, so yeah, so basically this is all the things needed for this one. Now, since we have this one, we can now replace this section here. Now, using the tilde, so this will be the dynamic entry. So let's begin by changing that to mongodb colon up colon forward slash. Let's bring down the following. So first, let's start with the db user. Okay, so let's start with db user and then emphasize the colon and then the another dollar sign. This time, let's copy the password. Okay, now next to our password, let's assign or the app. Then this time, let's assign the host, which is the database host. So next, we're going to emphasize or set up the port, pressing colon, and then another dollar sign here with a bracket. So I'm going to assign the port. There you go. And then from here, let's specify now the database. So add the forward slash, then a dollar sign again. Then let's bring down our database name. Okay. Added to that, since we're using an admin, so let's authenticate that in here. So by typing auth source equals to admin. All right. So feel free to post and copy this line by line. Okay. So make sure you check everything and everything is on place. Colon port slash database name and auth. Okay, why would we need this auth source main? So for the very own reason, since we created our database with the admin authentication, so very important to set this one. All right, so let's try that now. Okay, so from here, just do the Docker compose up. Okay, so then press enter. Okay, so I guess on this part, there's no error this time. So let's wait and see, and hopefully everything is workable. Okay, so there you go. Our server container is already running. So this time it's trying to connect the server container. So if there's a message display here, that indicates that our server is working. So it's waiting now for the MongoDB. All right. So one more. Oh, here. There you go. Okay, good. So at this point here, our database connection, see here, database was successfully connected. So which means that our server is working. Now to try this one, okay, so I'm going to install again the Thunder client. Okay, since I'm using a different server this time, so I'm going to reinstall this one. All right. Now to test this back end, let's do a test running. So let's begin by only the get all requests. That should be enough. So to start with, if you recall, let's create a request. Okay, so from here, let's start by typing localhost 4000. Okay, so from here, let's try this one. Okay, so we have, this is HTTPS. It should be HTTP. There you go. Okay, so for now, we have an error because we did not apply the base URL. Now, for that to work, let's apply the correct or insert the base URL. So this is the base URL. Let's copy that. Okay. And then let's move to the routes. Okay. Only these all movies. All right. And from here, let's paste that. Okay. So let's try one more time. And there you go. So at this point here, this connection with our server or the backend is workable. So let's proceed now on the front end. All right. At this point here, we already have our app. So from here, let's create our Docker file. All right. So basically, the backend, since they're both using the npm, so it's safe to say we can copy this content here. And then let's paste that in here. Now, the only changes here is I'm going to change this instead of server. This time, this will become client. Okay, so that's all we need. Both has npm. Also, we're going to change this expose port since React is by default is using 3000. So we need to save that also the 3000 as well. Now, next to that, since we already have these not modules, so we're going to ignore some of the files. We can also copy this docker ignore, and then let's apply that also in this section. Okay, okay, good. So that's all what we need for our docker ignore. So yeah, so that's it. So next to that, since we already have our app, okay, so take note the difference is only the working folder. Now, since we're already done with these things, we can now proceed on our Docker Compose. So let's work on that. So, but first we need to close everything from here and then head over to our Docker Compose. Okay, so we're going to build our services for that. So next to this one. So let's say, let's create somewhere here. So let's call these services as client. Okay, so take note of the few things from here. So first, we need to apply the build, which is the build location. So for the build location, we're going to add the app folder. Okay, very good. Okay. Next, let's set up the container name, and we're going to name this as client container. Next, better to apply also this std in open to true. Same with APY to true. Okay, so later I'm going to explain what are these things. So next, let's include also the ports. Then from our ports, okay, from our ports, let's expose the localhost for 3000 and same as the Docker. And for our volumes, Okay, for our volumes, let's indicate the local path, and then let's map that to the Docker part, which is the client working directory. Okay, so let's check everything. Okay, so similar to this one, we need also to set the path for the node modules. So this should be on the app. There you go. Oh, sorry, not app. This should be from client, right? And then this time, let's as a set also the depends on. Okay, so better to align all these things. Okay, so for our depends ons, we have two factors here. So the first one, we're going to depends on the Mongo, and the second one, I'm going to depend also the server. There you go. And then we can copy these networks and restart. Now, these are the things very important. Okay, so basically, that's all we need for this expression. Okay, so notice here, we added these two features, which is the stdin open and the tty. So in Docker perspective, these two are considered as the analogous of -t and -i arguments to run the command respectively. So we're in stdin open when you work your project outside the Docker container, or also we can also work with project within the Docker container. That's the purpose of the TTY. Something that you can explore in between inside and outside. So we just added that because this is one of the most common thing used when we're doing some Docker for the front end. Okay. So more on these documents you can check online so that you can explore more about what are all other things that we can do with our Docker or Docker Compose. So, all right. So that goes with the definition. So with that being said, let's work now with our Docker Compose. So let's open our terminal. Okay. So from here, let's run by typing Docker Compose up. Okay. So yeah. So at this point here, there's no error. So we need to wait until the end and see how it goes after the compilation. All right. So at this point here, our container is complete. So don't mind with this warning. So this is something about the updates within the component. Now to test if this works, let's head over to our browser, right? So from here, let's type localhost 3000 and there you go. All right, so this works. Now to test our data, let's create a entry. Let's say this one. Let's click submit and there you go. So one more. Let's try. Netflix movie. Okay, so let's submit that. Okay, good. So this is working. So let's update. There you go. So that's it, guys. So at this point here, we managed to build the entire full stack MERN and compile with Docker Compose. So feel free to comment out and ask anything that you wish to ask. So but for now, if you find this video informative, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. See you guys on the next video series. Cheers!